Hotels are supposed to be a safe haven, a home away from home while we travel. We enjoy the fresh sheets every night and go to sleep thinking that nothing bad could possibly happen. But this isn't always the case. In today's episode, we'll be exploring 3 horrific, unsolved hotel mysteries. But first, I'd like to thank Endel for sponsoring today's episode. If one thing is certain when it comes to researching true crime and all things unsolved mysteries, it's that the work requires an unrelenting amount of focus and attention to detail, all while necessitating relaxation and proper sleep to promote maximum productivity. It can be nearly impossible to balance these on a daily basis, but detrimental to our work if we don't. Staring at a screen and reading police reports all day can drain us of our attention, while the difficult nature of researching death and disappearances can make us anxious to sleep, unable to relax, and overall feeling groggy and gloomy. Luckily, through Endel, sponsors of today's video, we've been able to combat the stress and prime our productivity. Endel is an industry-leading sound-based app meant to help sustain focus, relaxation, and sleep while improving all 3 functions using the newest cutting-edge technology. It cultivates personalized, real-time soundscapes designed to help you concentrate better over time, calm your mind with feelings of safety and serenity, and enter deep sleeps of a higher quality throughout the night. The technology is powered by a newly patented AI that uses your location, weather, and heart rate to select the sounds you hear. It even tracks your circadian rhythms, also known as your biological clock, to sync up with nature's cycles and learn how your body reacts to the space and circumstances around you. Best of all, the soundscapes of Endel have the backing of in-depth neuroscience studies that guarantee its product will work faster with higher rates of success than regular playlists found on YouTube or other streaming platforms. Use the link in the description below to get a free week of your own personalized audio adventure, but do so quickly as the offer is only available to the first 100 visitors. So sign up for Endel today to find your focus, reset your relaxation, and settle into sleep better than you ever have before. And now let's dive in with today's mysteries. Lee Rotatori. On the afternoon of June 25th, 1982, the Council Bluffs Police Department was called to the scene of a grisly crime when hotel maids found the blood-soaked body of a young woman in room 106 of the Best Western Frontier Motor Lodge Motel, located at 2216 27th Avenue in Council Bluffs, Iowa. The woman, still dressed in her pajamas, was lying on her back in a pool of blood on the right-hand side of the bed. There were no signs of a struggle or forced entry, and the victim had died from a single knife wound to the heart inflicted from the front. She had been dead for around 12 hours before she was found. She was soon identified by hotel records as 32-year-old Lee Rotatori from Nunica, Michigan. Lee had been residing in the hotel for around a week before her demise. She was in temporary accommodation while she trained for her new job as the food service director at Jenny Edmondson Hospital in Council Bluffs. The oldest of 4 children, Lee had grown up on the outskirts of Rochester, Minnesota, and was described as a quiet woman who was a farm girl at heart. She attended the University of Wisconsin, where she achieved a bachelor's degree in dietary services, and then went on to get her master's in food nutrition. A detective who gathered background on the 32-year-old noted, "I haven't talked to anyone who didn't like her." Being well-liked and quiet, investigators had trouble pinpointing a motive for the horrific crime. Although her watch, ring, and billfold were missing from her room, Police Captain Eldon Jones told the media that he wasn't certain robbery was the true motive, noting that Lee's room hadn't been ransacked or torn apart like someone was looking for something. Meanwhile, the Pottawatomie County Medical Examiner, Dr. Samuel Rosa, stated the possibility that the slaying could have been sexually motivated, but Jones noted there was no conclusive evidence to support this theory. Tracing her last known movements, authorities found out that earlier that day, Lee had gone boating on Lake Manawa with some of her new hospital friends. The group had parted ways at dusk, and the 32-year-old had collected a McDonald's on her way home. No hotel staff saw Lee enter her room, making the fast food restaurant workers the last people to see her alive. Investigators noted that the hotel's close proximity to Interstate 29 to 80 meant that the killer could be 5 feet away or 1,000 miles away. They also stated that Lee had only bought enough food for one person. Back in Michigan, Lee's husband, Gerald Stanley Jerry Nemka, was waiting for her to return. The couple first married on August 15, 1978, in Madison, Wisconsin, before divorcing in 1979. They remarried in December of 1981 after reigniting their relationship. While Jerry and Lee had no children together, Lee had decided to keep the surname from her first husband because they shared an 11-year-old son who lived with him in Chicago. She also reportedly kept the name for professional reasons. At the time of Lee's demise, Jerry worked part-time as a delivery driver for a flower shop and part-time at a petrol station. Looking closer, however, detectives found that back in May of 1960, Jerry, who was 17 at the time, had been picked up for questioning in Starved Rock, Illinois, in relation to the murders of 3 young women and the fatal beating of a 16-year-old waitress from Chicago named Marilyn Duncan. When police caught Jerry, he had been driving a vehicle stolen from the northwest side, the same area where Marilyn had been attacked on April 29th, less than 1 week earlier. In an article from May 9th, 1960 by the Chicago Tribune, Jerry admitted to raping, choking, and beating her. During his time in prison, he was allowed to visit his mother for 1 week due to his good behavior, but ended up running away instead, although he was eventually apprehended. It is unclear if Jerry had an alibi for the time of his wife's slaying, or whether or not he was ever considered a suspect. The murder weapon in Lee's case was never found, and her murder has never been solved. However, some believe it could be connected to another similar case, although so far there's been no evidence to prove it. Linda Mayfield was born in Nebraska on August 8, 1960. On April 9, 1982, just months before Lee's murder, authorities were called to the Starlight Motel at 3320 West Broadway in Council Bluffs at 2:18 a.m. There were reports of a disturbance involving a man wielding a knife. Officers quickly arrived on the scene and found 21-year-old Linda Mayfield collapsed face down on the ground near the north office door. She had sustained numerous stab wounds to her face, chest, stomach, hand, and foot. Although she was taken to Mercy Hospital in Council Bluffs, she died in surgery at 4 a.m. A witness to the crime, who was a friend of Linda's, gave investigators a thorough description of the offender. He is described as being a white male between the ages of 26 and 28, standing between 5'7" and 5'10", and was clean-shaven. He wore a blue denim jacket, a light blue pullover shirt, and blue jeans. The witness also noted that the man had a lot of body hair that came up over his shirt collar. They thought he went by the name Chris. But despite this description and an illustration of the man, he was never identified, and Linda's case has never been solved. If you have any information about Lee's case or Linda's, you can call Council Bluffs Crime Stoppers on 712-328-7867, or the Council Bluff Police Department's Criminal Investigation Division on 712-328-4765. Jessica Kinsey. Born February 16, 1981. Jessica Ann Kinsey was an ordinary young girl in the 1990s. She attended Union Middle School in Union, Missouri, and was described by her loved ones as a shy girl who blossomed when she was with her friends, becoming more extroverted and outgoing. She also loved the movie Dirty Dancing and enjoyed swimming, camping in the summer months, and playing with her dog Max. Her favorite color was hunter green, and her bedroom walls had been painted in that exact shade. On Boxing Day, 1995, Jessica left home to go and visit one of her friends. She was meant to call her mother, Mary, at 5 p.m. to let her know whether or not she'd be home for dinner, but that phone call never came. Once Jessica reached her friend's home, she was picked up by 23-year-old Jimmy Hopkins, the son of her mother's friend. Reportedly, Hopkins paid a friend, Mark Henderson, to give the pair a ride in his aqua-colored two-door 1994 Chevrolet Cavalier. According to Henderson's later statement to the police, while the three drove, Jessica appeared morose, with her head down, not speaking, while Hopkins talked about how the 14-year-old was pregnant with his baby and the couple were going to Niagara Falls, New York to get married. Hopkins even showed Henderson some wedding rings. The two men and Jessica checked into the Dollar Inn in the 1000 block of North Main Street in Cloverdale, Indiana, during the early hours of the evening. Jessica and Hopkins stayed in room 222, while Henderson stayed alone in room 224. During the middle of the night, Henderson claimed that he heard loud noises coming from Jessica's room, noting that, at one point, it sounded like a body was thrown against a wall. However, when Henderson went to confront the pair about the noise, Hopkins claimed that the two were engaged in, quote, rough sex, and it was nothing to be concerned about. The following day, Henderson awoke to find room 222 vacant and his car gone. He reported the vehicle stolen immediately. Afterwards, investigators discovered that Hopkins had pawned his grandmother's wedding ring in Paris, Tennessee, 300 miles from Cloverdale later on the 27th, the day he and Jessica vanished from the hotel. Then, less than 2 weeks later, Henderson's vehicle was found abandoned in Compton, California. Detectives found that Hopkins had been working in the area at a local ice cream parlor. Witnesses claimed to have seen a girl matching Jessica's description with Hopkins, which led investigators to believe that the 14-year-old had arrived in Compton with him. However, Jessica was never seen or heard from again. In the late spring or early summer months of 1996, Jimmy Hopkins returned alone to Missouri. Investigators were unable to get a hold of him until several months later, in November of that year. Hopkins claimed he hadn't hurt Jessica, and told investigators he last saw the 14-year-old in Hollywood, California, where she was staying at a hotel with a Mexican man named Capone. However, the address Hopkins gave investigators for the hotel led them to a vacant lot. He also gave varying accounts about her whereabouts to anyone who asked him about it. Allegedly, Hopkins later told several people that he had murdered Jessica and disposed of her body. Mary, Jessica's mother, claimed that Hopkins harassed her for years afterwards, taunting her and shouting at her across car parks, telling her Jessica was dead and that she should get over it. Although authorities approached him at least once a year, Hopkins always lawyered up and refused to talk. Jessica's mother and friends told investigators that the 14-year-old wasn't dating Hopkins at the time of her disappearance, and that she had never been romantically involved with him. According to the Charlie Project, Mary also stated that she knew for medical reasons that Jessica couldn't possibly be pregnant. Jessica's friends noted that she'd never mentioned having a boyfriend. Neither family nor friends believed the 14-year-old ran away from home of her own volition. Mary did say, however, that her daughter was naive, and would have trusted Hopkins as she had known him since childhood. Frustratingly, however, no answers ever came in Jessica's case. In April of 2008, Hopkins handcuffed his wife Anna, 30, and shot her to death in their Joplin, Missouri home. He then turned the gun on himself. He was 35 years old and left the couple's 2 children without parents. Although Hopkins was never charged in relation to Jessica's disappearance, Mary, along with the investigators, believe he is responsible. Upon hearing about the couple's death, Mary said, quote, "I think Jimmy Hopkins is the only person who knew what happened to my daughter, and he's the only person who knew where he buried the body." Jessica's school friends still think about her. Her best friend at the age of 14, Aileen Thompson, believes Jessica would have called her if she'd run away, and that she wouldn't have kept any relationship a secret from her. In her home, Aileen still has a photograph hung up of the 2 girls making jewelry together at a Girl Scout meeting. She told the St. Louis Post, quote, "I wonder every day what she would be like. We would still be best friends. We would probably still talk every day." Jessica's case is still unsolved. Her parents left Union in 1998 and moved to Independence, Missouri. 14-year-old Jessica Ann Kinsey was last seen by her loved ones on December 26, 1995, in Cloverdale, Indiana. She was picked up from her friend's house by 23-year-old family friend Jimmy Hopkins and his friend Mark Henderson, and never came home afterwards. At the time of her disappearance, Jessica stood at 5'5" and weighed 160 pounds. She is a white woman with brown hair, hazel eyes, and pierced ears. She wears eyeglasses and has a small scar on her inner left forearm near the elbow. She may have the name Capone tattooed on the back of her neck. It is unclear where this idea came from, but it was likely told to authorities by Hopkins, who claimed Jessica had gone off with a Mexican man named Capone. Jessica was last seen wearing a white turtleneck, green sweatshirt, green leather jacket, dark green Levi jeans, and black trainers. She had a hunter green colored hair elastic or scrunchie in her hair. If she is still alive, she will be 40 years old. If you have any information about Jessica's disappearance, you can call the Union Police Department on 636-583-5700. Donald Fraser. Born in Queensland, Australia on April 10, 1892, Donald Fraser moved with his family to New Zealand in 1909. Here, he took up a position as a locomotive fireman, but the posting didn't last long, as Donald was argumentative and violent, and ended up getting into a physical altercation with another colleague, which resulted in him being fired. Following this, Donald worked a number of different jobs, but favoured being his own boss, and found hotel management to be his ideal position. In 1915, he married Elizabeth Walton, a fair-haired, blue-eyed, petite woman. The couple had their first child, a daughter named Joyce, a year later, and in 1926, they had their first son, Clutha. The pair ran various hotels together, and in 1929, they took over the Riccarton Racecourse Hotel in Christchurch, which was built in 1883. On the evening of November 17, 1933, Donald and Elizabeth had a drink with their guests in the hotel bar. At this time, pubs in New Zealand were only allowed to sell alcohol until 6 p.m, but Donald, who was somewhat of a rule breaker, ignored this law and had, for quite some time, managed to get away with serving his guests until the late hours of the night. A heavy drinker, Donald was drunk before much time passed. He was often said to be a particularly abrasive, quarrelsome, and violent man when he consumed alcohol, but on this occasion, he avoided butting heads with anybody, and shortly before midnight, he and Elizabeth headed to their room as the hotel guests began to filter out of the bar. At 11:45 p.m., the pair were ready for bed. According to Elizabeth's account of the evening, the door went just before the couple drifted off to sleep, so Donald went to see who it was. However, she fell asleep before her husband returned, and was woken by a loud explosion as Donald was shot with a double-barreled shotgun while sleeping in bed next to her. The following police investigation into Donald's murder was one of the most extensive and exhaustive in New Zealand's history. Authorities pursued numerous lines of inquiry, travelling throughout the country to conduct interviews and chase up leads. Donald was known to start fights and throw people out of his hotel on a regular basis. This, combined with his fast-paced and risky lifestyle, which involved gambling and petty crime, meant detectives weren't short on potential suspects. One of the major discoveries during the initial investigation was a footprint located on the landing of the fire escape outside the couple's bedroom. It is generally believed that the killer fled the scene using the veranda, and the footprint was noted to have been made by a shoe with a rubber sole. As a result, everybody in the building had their footwear examined to see if they could be a potential match to the crime scene. Donald's own shoes, a pair of rubber galoshes, were ruled out as being a match. Detectives asked around at local shoe shops and warehouses in an attempt to try and trace the make and brand of footwear that would leave a similar print. Eventually, the police determined that this print belonged to a friend of the couple's daughter, 16-year-old Joyce, who reportedly paid the teenager nocturnal visits. However, this young man was never considered a suspect or person of interest in the case. In the days following the crime, Elizabeth was questioned extensively. She maintained her story that the couple had a happy marriage, had no worries, and that on the night of the shooting she was fast asleep and was awoken by the gunshot. When she woke, she didn't see the attacker. However, investigators noticed that when they arrived on the scene, Elizabeth's side of the bed was neatly made and didn't appear to have been slept on, nor did her pillow. A doctor who examined her the following day found no bruising on her skin from the recoil of the weapon, nor any gunpowder on her nightgown. Additionally, the family did not keep any weapons on the property. It is unclear if Elizabeth even knew how to shoot a gun. However, it was then discovered by authorities that Elizabeth had been lying about the state of the couple's marriage. Reportedly, in the weeks before the slaying, Donald and Elizabeth had discussed the possibility of separating or divorcing. Donald even talked about installing his mistress as the landlady of the hotel. Elizabeth had found out about Donald's affair around this same time. Donald had met a young woman named Eileen Hardcastle through a mutual friend. Eileen lived in Wellington, But as Donald had to travel there frequently for meetings, the pair were able to see each other on a fairly regular basis. After Elizabeth found out, she and her husband had a heated argument, during which she'd cut his clothing into pieces. The story was written down in a letter Donald sent to Eileen, and investigators found evidence of shredded clothing in the couple's bedroom. While authorities had moved on from Elizabeth as a possible suspect, they circled back to her following the discovery of Donald's affair. By this point, however, Elizabeth had grown tired and angry and refused to speak with the police. She also hired one of the best criminal lawyers in town, a man named Charles Thomas, who essentially blocked detectives from speaking with her. As a result of this, investigators began asking around in an attempt to gather information on Elizabeth, and were unsurprised to find she was deemed just as unlikable as her husband. One interesting piece of evidence that was found was that the shotgun shells recovered from the scene had come from the West Coast, an area that Elizabeth had visited just 1 month before the crime was carried out. It was mid-1934 when the inquest into Donald's murder was held. Coroner Ed Mosley concluded that the 41-year-old had been killed by an unknown person or persons. Most notably, he listed the names of those he felt had been truthful and reliable during the inquest, implying that those he did not name were lying, stating, quote, "I leave to the public the estimation of the other evidence that has been brought before this court. Elizabeth was recorded as being vague and evasive on the stand. Much of what she said could be proved to be untrue." Days after the inquest concluded, Mosley received an interesting letter, which read as follows. "Mr. Mosley, you are a very smart man, accusing witnesses of telling lies, but you are on the wrong track. I shot Donald Fraser, as I was quite justified in doing so, but you have the best part to find me." The police sent this letter off to be examined by handwriting experts, but it left them frustratingly still at square one, as only 2 of the 4 experts asked thought that Elizabeth had written the note. A lack of physical evidence eventually led police to theorize that Elizabeth had orchestrated the murder, but not pulled the trigger herself. Donald Fraser's murder is still unsolved. Authorities never had the evidence to bring charges against his wife, Elizabeth. Modern-day historians and journalists theorize that Elizabeth killed her husband because she didn't want to lose the luxurious and lavish lifestyle she was living because of his money. She was his sole beneficiary and received £670 after Donald's death. This is the modern-day equivalent of $55,700 United States dollars. In the aftermath, Elizabeth took up with a racecourse driver named Charles Cheney, who worked as a barman for a time in the hotel. She continued to run the hotel until 1935, which is when she, Cheney, and her son Clutha moved to New South Wales, Australia. She vanished from public records after the 1930s, although Clutha was known to be still living in Australia during the 1950s. As for the hotel, it is still operating today. Following Donald's murder, however, there were many reports about it being haunted. Staff claimed that doors slammed and taps turned on by themselves. They felt that Donald was still around, searching for his killer. And there you have the facts. Please leave a comment down below with your own theories and speculations, and remember to like this video and subscribe to support the channel. You can also support us on Patreon to win a chance to see your hometown featured in an upcoming Cold Case Detective episode. Thank you for watching. Stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.